Hi everyone. I'm really looking forward to getting on with our Module 2 of the Essentials of Coaching for the Webinars for CPA Mentors series. Module 2 focused on one of the central goals and outcomes of coaching, which is to help our coachees improve their performance in the workplace. We're going to be cycling back a little bit in Module 3 to start looking more at some of the higher order skills and how to communicate, the value of those higher order skills to employees. So we're sort of starting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but I thought it would make sense to highlight the value of coaching with reference to how we can help our coachees improve their performance at work. So we'll start by looking at the agenda for today. So what are we going to see in Module 2? The focus is talking about coaching applications across contexts. Again, the context here is improving work performance for our coachees. And of course, as we mentioned in Module 1, making sure and ensuring that our ability to help the coachees actually impacts both of them as an individual and as a professional, and the place that they live, something we talked about earlier. So we're going to review some of the coaching approaches, which we can easily use to help students enhance their performance at work. And then it's going to really focus on the ability and understanding of motivation, and specifically around goal setting for motivation. So how do we work to set and define goals for the outcomes of coaching? Of course, that's the key component, right? If you can't set the goals in an articulate way that makes sense to both parties and makes sense to the place that the coachees lives, we're never going to be able to get there. Of course, a big part of defining goals is also so that we, as a coach, and the coachee, in the context of the coaching relationship, can measure and manage the outcomes of coaching. Being able to look at things as a goal, a distinct behavioral, definable, discernible, operationizable goal that we can see enables us to determine whether or not that goal was met, and enables us to be able to manage that goal if it is not met. And we'll wind up by talking a little bit about how we follow up and how we reflect on our work with our coachee. So as I mentioned in Module 1, a big part of coaching is an opportunity that presents itself for both the coach and the coachee to help that coachee improve their work performance in the context of his or her current roles. Helping with performance is one of the central roles of a coach. In Module 1, we talked about what a coach is and what a coach is not. And the purpose of coaching is not to help people understand the deep meaning of who they are. It's not to understand and analyze the way they work in their careers, etc. And at the most basic and practical levels, the central role of a coach is to help with the performance of work for your coachee. And again, we'll talk in Module 3 a little bit more about some of the higher order skills that we're going to be using to do that. This is very distinct from career assistance. So we're not helping people necessarily network and find a job, or help them elevate themselves to a certain position, or to help them be able to negotiate a raise or a promotion. We're talking primarily about helping that student in their current work role. And this, of course, relies upon the student's understanding of their job. It relies on the student's understanding of what their role really is, what the goals are for their job, and what their objectives are for coaching. Which is why, just as a quick aside, one of the most important parts of beginning the process of coaching is to really encourage your coachee to seek out a very detailed understanding of their job, their roles, and their goals in their job, their objectives in their role. And for us as coaches, this begins with understanding how motivation works. How do we motivate people to be able to meet their goals? How do we motivate our coaches to be able to achieve the things that they want? And of course, we understand that motivation is about the persistent effort directed towards a goal. And we know that if we want people to improve their performance at work, they must be motivated to do so. And us as coaches, we need to understand quite a bit about how motivation works. So how does motivation work? What is motivation really about? Well, there's a couple of different approaches to motivation that I want to explore today in this module. And before we get into this, let me just say that my students and my clients often ask me, are you going to tell us a couple of different approaches to understanding motivation? Well, which is the right one? Well, because you're dealing with human beings who are dynamic and complicated. When people ask me, what's the truth? My answer is yes. In other words, they're all true, and they all have something to offer. We're going to be focusing today on one of them in this module, but these all have applications for, primarily, the kind of advice and input that you will give to your coachees. So it starts out by understanding motivation with respect to what, in psychology, we call needs theories of motivation, which is a very classic approach to understanding motivation. Of course, many people that are watching this webinar right now might be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs as one of the most widely known needs theories of motivation. I'm going to share with you one that I think is a little bit different. Similar, but different, and I think more simple to understand and use. So motivation is about needs being met. And in this particular theory, we understand that there are three sets of needs that human beings have. We have existence needs, relatedness needs, and growth needs. And what this theory says is, it's actually a really simple idea. We are motivated to get the things that we need that we don't have. So we begin by looking at existence needs, because it's the lowest level, and also it's going to be the least useful for you, because existence needs relate to things primarily like food and shelter. And arguably, all of the coachees you're working with, and more importantly, the people that the coachees are working within their organizations, have these needs met already. They will not serve as primary motivator to help enhance the performance of coachees that you're working with. So we can look at the relatedness needs and growth needs. To help enhance the performance in the context of work for the coachees, one of the ways is to help the coachees engage in activities that will further enhance their motivation, because we know that motivation enhances performance. If I'm more motivated to do well in my role, it's more likely that I'm going to do it. Simple. So what are relatedness needs? Relatedness needs have to do with the needs that people have to feel part of something that is bigger than themselves. For example, as you're sitting and listening to this, what if I asked you to complete the sentence, I am a, in as many ways as you can? Just take 2 seconds right now and think of all the things you would include. Myself, I might include, I am a professor, I am a brother, I am a father. And if you go on with all of these things that you are, you'll start to notice something really interesting. They are all about groups that you belong to, collections of people that you belong to, including things like Canadian, your religion, your faith, your way of looking at the world, your membership in an organization. Such a big part of how we define ourselves and how we bring meaning to our lives is through our relatedness needs. So how does this work to enhance people's performance? Maybe we can tap into this by working with our coachees to ask them if they feel part of the organization that they're working in. Because if they do not feel part of their department, if they don't feel a sense of belongingness to the relationship that they have with their manager, their colleagues, with their peers, with their clients, customers, with the broader culture or professional culture, that group membership becomes less important. And as a result, people are not motivated to achieve the needs of that particular group. If they don't feel a part of the organization that they work in, they are going to be inherently less motivated to pursue the goals of that organization. Hence, they're not going to do as well at work. So what do we do about this? Interestingly, if somebody does not feel that way, we can probably help him be able to develop some methods for feeling part of the organization. What might some of those things be? Might be things like helping be part of the development of a brand for that organization, engaging in social and other types, perhaps fundraising, philanthropic approaches to helping the community with a group of people that they work with. There are lots of informal social interventions that we can encourage our coachees to be a part of that will enhance their belongingness, their relatedness to the organization that they work in. Actually, there's an interesting story of the US, even if we don't want to go this far. One of the things the organization did was they said, listen, we are so serious about you being related and belonging to the organization, we're going to give a bonus to every employee who puts a tattoo on their body of our logo. And we certainly don't encourage that kind of thing, but you get the idea. So we have this third one here called growth needs. And what this taps into is that people have a need to feel that they are growing and getting better at something in their life and in their work. So we have to ask ourselves, what sort of things make people feel that they are growing? Recognition is a big one, right? But the problem is if we know that the coachee needs more recognition, we might feel, as a coach, our hands are tied because I'm not going to go to their boss and say, hey, you need to recognize this employee and enhance his work performance. That's not your role. Way outside of the realm of your role. So what do? Well, lots of ways to get recognition. One is that somebody spontaneously comes and gives it to you, which is the best, right? But less frequent. The other one is you go out and you seek it out. And that's what I would encourage as a coach, your coach to do. In fact, if you see that growth needs are one of the things that are holding back the motivation of this individual, an excellent idea is to encourage that coachee to go and approach their organization, their boss, their supervisor, and say it's really important that you notice and see the accomplishments that I'm making here, or the efforts that I'm going to. Are you seeing them? Now that might seem like a very odd intervention, but I'll say that advanced motivational techniques feel odd. They do. Just like rapport building techniques. Just like coaching might feel a little bit unnatural, because it's not a natural conversation. It's actually a purposeful intervention to help enhance the growth, your perception, or your coachee's perception of growth. And by the way, when I say recognition, I am not talking about praise. I'm talking about recognition, noticing things in people. There's a whole host of incentives that you can, or goals that correspond to, that you can suggest to your coachees that correspond to some of these needs that people have. So again, relatedness is helping that individual encourage your coachee to do something at work to help them feel part of something. And by the way, interestingly, one of the most important and most basic methods that your coachee can initiate their organization to create relatedness is the most profound and oldest historical way in which human beings create relatedness, i.e., to break bread, eat together, right? It's easy to do. And by the way, when I say eat together, I don't mean send out a memo that says there's pizza in the lunchroom and everybody comes and grabs a slice on their own time. That's just free pizza, right? When I talk about breaking bread together, I mean eating together. It's so easy to do. Again, for growth needs, try to encourage that coachee to surface the kind of things that would help them feel that they're growing in their job, which might be feedback and recognition from others. It might be an opportunity to learn about a different component of the organization they haven't had a chance to explore before. All sorts of ways, and encouraging them to go and take the initiative to go and ask for those things in their organizations. One of the most important things that you can impart on your coachee in terms of the higher order skills is initiative and personal responsibility for outcomes at work. Your role as a coach is to encourage your coachee to take initiative to make most of those things happen. Now, I want to talk about meaningfulness. This connects well to the idea of the psychological contract that we spoke about in Module 1. And part of that psychological contract is that employees are increasingly expecting continuous education and development out of work. One of the things they're also demanding and expecting is meaningfulness. So I thought I'd share with you this really interesting model called the job characteristics model that looks at three things. Some of the core characteristics of jobs that are really important for organizational development and the ways which they lead to really important ways of thinking. A psychological state that in turn lead to really important outcomes for an organization or an individual. So of course, when we talk about it, we're going to start at the back end. The outcome includes things like one we're going to be looking at right now is motivation and performance. And so let's go back and look at some of those core job characteristics. I really only want to talk about the first three: skill variety, task identity, and task significance. So what this says is that if people have skill variety, which I'll explain in a moment, it can make work more meaningful, which in turn helps people be more motivated for work. So what is skill variety? Well, all you've got to do to understand skill variety is to think about the first job you ever had in your life. And all you've got to do to understand this is look back and think about that job. I'll share with you a story from one of my students who told me that she worked at the YMCA folding towels. And as she sat there folding towels, she looked around and thought to herself, I can improve the way in which you've told me to fold towels. I've got ideas on how these towels can be given out in a more effective and efficient manner. Not only that, I can fix the desk. I've got ideas for this. Your signage is in the wrong place. She had all sorts of ideas on how to improve the organization. The problem was she was nobody. She was a peon, a part-time employee working hourly who had no input on how the organization runs. And ultimately, the more you think about ways to improve the business and the less opportunity that you have to do so in your job, the less motivated you are in the role that you are given. And that's what skill variety is all about. If you've got 10 things that you know how to do, and your work allows you to do 3 of them, you're going to be less motivated than a workplace that allows you to do 6 of them. It's a really interesting idea. We'll talk in a moment about how we can use that idea to help enhance people's motivation. So skill variety says the more of your skills that you get to exercise at work, the more motivated you will be to do the core elements of your job. Task identity. You get in your job the opportunity, or does your coachee get the opportunity in their job, to see the end results of their actions? Somebody, your boss, comes and says to you, I've got a really important project for you to work on, and I want you to work on it day and night. This is the most important thing we've ever done here at X organization, and I'm entrusting you, my valuable, important employee. And I want you to dedicate your whole world to this project. And then you do, and you work on it for months on end, day and night. Finally, at the end of the period of time, you hand over the results of that project to your boss and wipe the sweat off your brow and say, thank goodness that project is over. I can't wait to hear how it went because it was so important. So lo and behold, you sit and you wait and wait and wait, and you don't hear anything. Finally, you decide to go and approach your boss and ask, remember that thing I worked on day and night for 3 months and missed the kids' baseball games and dinner and whatnot? Whatever happened to that? The boss says, oh, man, well, holy Moses, I forgot all about that. Really glad you brought it up to me. Listen, we decided not to go ahead with that, and I'm really, really sorry. But we didn't implement that at all. And I know you worked on it for 3 months, but we didn't do anything with it. Just sort of went in the garbage. But you know what? Am I ever glad you're here? Because I've got a really important project for you to work on, right? Well, what level of zeal, or in other words, motivation, might you be approaching with this subsequent project with? I would gather very little. That's what skill variety is about. Thirdly, task significance. Do people get to see the end results of their actions in their work? Can you see any meaningfulness and meaning, any broader big picture meaning in the work that you do? I remember a client of mine who was working for a PR agency, very interesting work. And eventually he had to devote his life to working for a company that produces toothpaste. And he worked day and night. And he had a young family at the time, and he missed a lot of things in their life. And he eventually turned to me and said, here I'm busting my butt and missing out on my child's lives to sell toothpaste. I don't give a darn about toothpaste. Why should I? The only way he was able to really focus on the work was to reframe this toothpaste as something else. Because although he could look at it as selling toothpaste, he also could look at it as the fact that tooth decay is the third leading cause of heart disease in Canada. And that when you encourage people to have better tooth dental hygiene, you in fact might be preventing them from having heart disease. So he was able to reframe it from toothpaste to helping people with heart disease. All of a sudden, the motivation changes. When you see yourself as ticking boxes and going through the motions, it doesn't work nearly as well as when you say, you know what, I might be an accountant or a finance professional or a management professional who is working through a project with their organization, but I don't really see any meaning in it. Well, or you can turn around and say, you know what, I'm actually helping perhaps a small business be better and more productive so they can employ people and sell a fantastic product or service. You know? So it's really about, like, task significance is about how can an individual reframe the way they look at work to make it more meaningful and hence more motivational. So let's look at some applications about meaningfulness. This is really about you as a coach, encouraging and suggesting to your coachees a couple of interesting ways of utilizing this model. So encouraging the coachees to broaden their skill variety. So perhaps it might mean, what are some of the skills that you have that perhaps you aren't using at work? Let's take a look at some of those and talk about some ways in which those skills might add value to your organization. And then perhaps you can go to your organization and say, I've got a whole bunch of other skills that I'm not using in this job. And I think there's some things that I could do to add to the value of this organization by utilizing some of those skills. Although these are sort of thin examples, I think they speak to some important outcomes. I do a lot of work with the public service in Ontario. And one of the things they do in public service in Ontario is they have people who are doing really tightly defined jobs, but oftentimes they don't have time for some of the more interesting things. So for example, they say we don't have a social media presence, or we don't have a really rich marketing department, or we don't really have a rich learning and development intervention department. And maybe if we start asking some of the people, maybe we can find out maybe some of those people are really good at social networking, at event planning, at IT strategy. And we don't have someone distinctly in that job. So from an organization's perspective, they might find a broader range of skills that each individual employee is good at that they can utilize. As a coach, you might encourage them to go to their organization and say, I've got skills that you were not using, and I'd like to use them. And perhaps they can, if they are using 4 and they get to use 5, enhance their motivation. We can also help people and suggest to our coachees to enhance the task identity. Look for the end result. To really think about, where does this work go? If someone has a customer service role, he might see himself as answering the phone or scheduling appointments, but in fact, maybe he's actually enhancing a consumer's ability to use a product. And if that product helps them cook a wonderful meal, maybe is he, in fact, actually helping people have wonderful food? And if they love food, that's a really cool thing. That's a lot better than saying I answer the phone. So it's all about, can you encourage your coachee to look for the end result? What is the meaning of the work that you do? You might be someone who's answering the phone, crunching numbers, doing account management, but what are you really doing? And in many cases, certainly in the financial area and in management and accounting, we actually might be helping businesses be more effective and run better. And when you make businesses run better and be more effective, you do important things. Like you make people that work for those organizations have more meaning in their work. You help that organization be more profitable, such that they can hire more people, give more people raises, enhance the employment status of the people who already work for that company, and enhance the lives of the clients that your organization works with. Enhance small business, enhance large business, and do the same things. Provide employment, provide better services and products. Those are pretty cool things. Maybe you also need to discuss and discover the significance. How does this work bring meaning? What really is the meaning of work to you? Just shifting the thinking of your coachees to stop thinking of themselves as someone who is doing a task in a long assembly line of tasks, and instead get them to look at the big picture and the purpose of the organization. It can actually motivate people really, really profoundly. How else does motivation work? Motivation is about goals. Motivation is about setting goals. One of the most widely used, easy to implement, and long-standing theories of motivation is the idea that motivation is achieved through the setting of goals. A motivational technique that uses specific, well-defined, challenging, and acceptable goals and provides feedback to enhance performance. So what does this mean? It means that my ability to articulate very clearly what someone's goal is, or my ability as a coach to encourage my coachees to define that goal with their manager, their organization, helps them be able to meet those goals. We're going to talk about this some more, but if the boss of your coachee comes to him and says, you have to be more professional, and the coachee thinks he's being professional, then the feedback, you need to be more professional, does nothing. In fact, it might even make things worse. But if that boss or the coachee can encourage that discussion to move a little further and say, okay, you know what? I'm cool with being professional, but what does that look like? What's the goal of being professional? Does that mean you want me to wear a suit every day to work? Does that mean you don't want me to voice any discontent in our meetings? What does it mean in terms of behavior? If that person's able to see that because it's specific, it's challenging, and it's acceptable, and because it's articulate and clear, the experience itself provides feedback. So if one of the goals of a coachee is to have less conflict, and last week they had 6 problems with their staff members, and this week they have 2, it's pretty easy to see how experience itself provides feedback. So motivation is about setting goals. You've got to set goals with your coachee, though. It's not about the goals that you set, of course. It's about the goals that they begin with. And they always go first in setting goals. You might have some different ideas on how to do it once they've spoken first, but you've got to let them go first. Why? One of the most important, very technical psychological principles in the world. People like the things that come out of their mouth more than they like the things that come out of your mouth. A really important lesson to learn. So we've got to get the things coming out of their mouth and work with them. And you only do that by letting the coach set their goals at the outset and to help them define those goals. So what does this mean to define a goal? I think the big part of defining a goal for me is about moving from something, a goal that is non-behavioral, to something that is behavioral. So what does that mean? A behavior you can see, a concept you can't see might have multiple meanings. And I'm going to talk more about that. But the ability to define something behavioral enables motivation. One of the major reasons why is because it prevents what I call characterization. So your coachee comes to you and says, I'm not able to influence this group that I'm working with, and I want to work on that as a goal. And the goal is be more influential. The problem is that if you say to your coachee, you have to be, there's a good chance they're going to defend themselves. Because that is a really loaded term, very emotional for someone to sit there and say, I lack confidence. But on the other hand, to be able to define it as such, you need to spend more time showing your boss and the people around you the things that you've accomplished as a result of your own initiative. That's behavioral. It means on Wednesday when you finish Project X, Go to John and show him the thing that you accomplished. That is less emotionally loaded. And that's why behavioral works better at motivating people than non-behavioral. It also, again, enables people to be able to measure and manage outcomes. We can define them as behaviors, then we can measure them. People can sit around and debate whether or not someone is confident. I hear it all the time. He's very confident. No, he's very arrogant. No, he's covering up his confidence with his expression of confidence. This is all muddled in definition, but you know what? The behavioral stuff is far less ambiguous. We're going to talk about this some more as we move along in the program as well. If we look at the behavioral definition of goals, we can help really enhance performance because we can find out what are the behaviors that led to excellent performance. And as a slight shift, we can also use this approach to help manage the coaching relationship that you have with your coachee and understand what are the mutual goals that each person has in the coaching relationship. Let me give you another example of some of these ideas that we need to utilize to define more behavioral goals. So we'll look at 6 words here that I think are used often to give feedback, to define goals for individuals and organizations. We have to ask ourselves, what do these really mean in terms of behavior? This is a really good exercise for us to do individually as a coach, and as well for us to do interactively or iteratively with our coachees. So one of the goals they have is it's about respect. You've got to be more respectful. Well, what does that mean? Because one of the things I found is that to one person, respect means tell me like it is, shoot from the hip, I've got thick skin, I can take it, I don't dance around, don't be worried, I'm not going to get upset. To somebody else, respect means actually, I'm very, very sensitive. Please think about what you say before you open your mouth. Think about my reactions. Don't be harsh. So who's right? They're both respect, aren't they? So the word respect pretty quickly starts to mean nothing. What does collaboration mean? Another great one. Well, some people will tell me collaboration means we get in a room, we bang around ideas, we have consensus, everyone agrees, we all hold hands and sing Kumbaya together. Well, somebody else says, no, without conflict and debate, you don't have collaboration. Which is it? Quite frankly, it doesn't really matter. The important thing is, if that is a goal that you're working on with your coachee, you need to spend some time defining it with them. You need to learn how to encourage them to go back to their organization and say, hey, you want more collaboration from me. You want better approach and teamwork from me. I'm cool with that. Tell me what it means behaviorally so I can go back and work on it with my coach. Same thing with teamwork. What is teamwork? And again, one of the big ones I hear is the absence of conflict. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's the same definition for everybody. What's the behaviors that you see that tells you someone's engaged in teamwork? Productivity. Someone wants to be more productive. What does that mean? Does that mean because, the way we usually measure productivity is time? So the person who spends more time is more productive than the person who spends less time? Well, I can really strongly envision another perspective on that. Because I don't know about you, but I've spent a lot of time doing nothing. And I've spent very little time doing a lot. So is time really the measure of productivity that we're looking at when we're defining a goal for anybody in this type of context? Or it's ink on paper. The person who writes the most produces the most. I don't know if that's true. Innovative. What does that mean? What does it mean to be innovative? Does it mean to make controversial suggestions? Does it mean to be devil's advocate? Does it mean to challenge the status quo? Or does it mean to come up with new ideas? Does it mean to use existing competencies that an organization has to come up with new products and services? What does it really mean? And professionalism. What does that mean? I got lots of people who think professional means pushing people around. I know lots of people who think professional means being crazy, kind, and conciliatory. Don't know. To some people, professional means be yourself. To some people, professional means don't be yourself. So it really depends upon the ways in which we look at it. In fact, words really matter in a whole host of ways. We're talking about being able to define things behaviorally. I get a lot of people saying to me, you're teaching me about semantics. Well, you know what? When we're setting goals, that's an essential part of our communication. Semantics is everything. It's the only thing that matters. You know, goal setting is essential for motivation. If people can't see it behaviorally, can't define it, they can't act on it. If they can't define it, they can't measure it. If we can't articulate it, we can't reflect on it. Setting SMART goals with your student in terms of the coaching outcomes. SMART goals: specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, time-bound. This again speaks to the essence of a behavioral goal. What goals will really begin to bring about success at work? That's a really excellent set of questions to start off at the beginning of the goal setting process with you and your coach. When you look at your success in your career, in your workplace, in your job and your role, what kinds of goals will bring about success? How can we define them? How can we define them specifically, behaviorally? What are the behaviors or outcomes that indicate the goal is met? It's a really great question. Another one I don't have up here on the slide is, if we're looking to take more initiative, what does success look like? A really great set of questions to ask and work around with your coach and in subsequent sessions to really encourage follow-up and reflection. Last time we spoke about a goal, what was it? What was the behavioral definition of that goal? What did you do to attain that goal? What was the behavior that you engaged in? What happened? What was the outcome? Did you meet the goal? What happened in the end? And depending upon the answer to that question, what do we do now? A big part of being able to do this is setting up and teaching your coachees how to use a learning journal. It's such a simple idea. It's the kind of thing that everyone thinks is a great idea. But when I teach it, I would probably say about 1/3 of the people do it. I'm encouraging you to do it. And that means to encourage, to really push your coachees to keep a learning journal. That's why the first thing I do before our first session, I say go to the store and pick yourself up a little notebook, a small little one, a little notebook, just lined pages, hardcover notebook. That is just for coaching. And you bring it with you, and you don't leave it at the office. And that you can actually journalize some of your learning. And it's not about, like, I'll speak to men that are listening, a diary with a locket on it and flowers. Don't think that when you think journal. Think it's really actually a really logical tool to help you reflect on our learning. What did I do? Did it work or did it not work? What did I do exactly so I can recollect my actions and to really work out ahead of time and plan ahead of time what are my actions for the next time? It's a really great method of being able to plan out your actions, to be able to be purposeful on how you behave at work. If goals are behavioral, we need to do them on purpose. And I would say that's the essence of growth throughout the course of our careers. The act of doing more things on purpose, being in charge of the way we act. And a learning journal is an excellent way to do that. When I look at how people engage themselves at work and so many of the super important goals they have, the kind of things they might work on with a coachee, I see that we don't plan out at all. We're going to have the most pivotal conversation we've ever had at work, no planning. But interestingly, when we do these things, we do only arguably, periodically, we did all the planning in the world. Think about cooking. It's interesting, even if you bake once a week. So you do 50 baking projects per year. How much planning goes into each baking project that you do 50 times a year? I bet it's a whole heck of a lot. I bet when you're baking, you're pulling out a book off the cupboard or off the internet, you're printing it up, looking at it, you're measuring your things, you're getting your stuff out of the cupboard, you're making a shopping list for the things you don't have, you're setting it all. Like, think of all of the planning that goes into baking you do 50 times a year. But when you look at your behavior as an employee and the conversations that you have with so and so who you want to encourage by and from, that you might do 50 times a day, no planning. And encouraging a coachee to use a journal is a really great way to get them to start planning out some of those things. Failing to plan is planning to fail. Something to think about. There's another really important application of the idea of setting goals. Slightly shifting gears over to the mentoring relationship, as it has to do with managing the expectations and setting up the relationship. In the context of a coaching relationship, we change the goals to norms. A norm is a generally agreed upon rule for interaction that must be behavioral. And a norm aims at developing those relationships to a place where they're wonderful and meaningful to both parties over time. And it's a really important way of beginning a coaching relationship, especially when that relationship, we've got to move to it real quick. So what do? We have to really start by determining how we are going to talk to one another. What is the purpose of coaching? What are the behavioral goals that we have in our coaching relationships? And the purpose of us working together, the coach and the coachee, and that's a really excellent way to begin your first or second session with your coachee. It also means that you have to sort of manage expectations as a coach. That means you've got to really set goals and norms and expectations with your coachee. This is not my role here. I'm not an analyst. I'm not a psychotherapist. I'm not your counselor, not your boss, and possibly I'm not your parent. It's really important to set those expectations because that's the part of defining what the role is of a coach and coach. It might also get into things that we see as a little bit less deep, but what I have found are hugely important and impactful: timing, frequency, location, all the logistics of coaching. So how long are we going to spend together? What are we going to do in terms of, booking and arranging times to meet together? What if someone can't make it to the coaching meeting or they're going to do it over the phone? What's the expectation that you guys have for each other? You might be working with a coachee who says, I don't want to Skype or over the phone. I want to only be in person. Where are we going to meet? Online? In a coffee shop? In someone's office? You might be working with somebody who says the opposite. What an important thing to figure out at the front end. Also, what are we going to do if someone's late? Do I try to manage those expectations up front with an informal contract? A really great thing even you could do as well in your coaching relationship, just to maybe make 5 or 6 bullet points on a hunk of paper that says, hey, look, this is what we're going to do when someone's late. We're going to promise to give them 24 hours notice, 48 hours notice. We're going to use email to do that. And we're going to agree to what we're going to accept if that happens 48 hours prior. A really great set of expectations to set up with. Some coaches are going to say, I want things to be emergent. In other words, I want to meet with you when I need to. The problem with that is, some advice to you coaches, it's not the best approach, because that means every time you meet with that person, number one, it's going to be urgent, and they're all charged up and upset. Number two, it's going to mean a last minute change of plans for you every time, which could be stressful, especially if you, and you probably do, lead a very busy life. My suggestion is always in person. That's my suggestion. I know it's not always possible. Certainly the first session, it's a really good idea to meet them in person. Get some rapport going. You can perhaps do subsequent ones electronically. My suggestion is, Skype or FaceTime, because then that way you can see the individual. But ultimately, the best is in person. Outside the office is my suggestion as well. neutral environment, coffee shop, etc. What are the learning expectations of the coachee? What do they really expect to learn? What are they looking for out of this? Because some of them will tell you, I just want someone to vent to, which can be fine, a very fine component of what you do with your coaching client. Certainly not a great ultimate goal, but sometimes that's what some people want, just someone to bounce ideas off like a muse. You also want to be setting up some protocol for and expectations around how you're going to deal with problems and issues. What do you do if you don't agree? What do you do if you have a personality clash? How are you going to manage that? Really good thing to deal with at the front end. You can develop a short list with the student. You can use categories. So how do we manage conflict? How do we deal with timing and logistics? The stuff I listed on that previous slide can be a really great sort of format to set up a short list of expectations that we have of each other. Again, you write it down on a hunk of paper when you first meet. And to do this, you really have to be honest and anticipate what kind of issues you might encounter. Perhaps depending upon you as a coach, you have someone in your family who's ill, and you may have to, at the last minute, cancel an appointment because you have to go to the hospital or go and tend to a loved one. Maybe you have young children at home. Maybe you have something else going on in your life. Really important to set that up and let your coachee know about that, and vice versa, to encourage them to bring some of those things up to you, too. The student sets the goals first. Then you work to fine-tune them as a pair in terms of both the expectations of your relationship and the main sort of end game goals of the coaching initiative. Your expectations, their expectations. Limitations. Here's when I can and cannot meet. My approach as a coach. Really important to be transparent. Hey, look, I'm very frank as a coach. Well, if I'm a coachee and I don't like frankness, I want to know that in my first meeting with you. That's going to make the relationship so much more productive and so much more meaningful for both parties. And lastly, the learning and reflection norms. So let them know that you will be making learning and reflection and perhaps even a learning journal part of how you're going to work together, and that their commitment to keeping up with that and engaging in some of the suggestions that you make, including the suggestions around how to learn, are adhered to. Because as you know, your coach, just like anything else, you get out of it what you put into it. So you want to make those expectations clear up front. So what do we have as our next steps in Module 3? We're going to be looking at career coaching, but not so much about, hey, here's how you help your coach get more money, get a raise, discover what they want to be when they grow up, but more about how to illustrate the value of these higher order skills to them. Really, how do I say to my coachee, when you can learn these higher order skills, here's how it can help advance and enhance the meaningfulness of your career. We're also going to be looking at how does effective communication play into this coaching practice. How does emotional management from both ends, in terms of my own coach and in terms of communicating the value of that higher order skill to my coachee? How can I teach my coachees how effective communication, emotional management, listening, and self-awareness can be beneficial and impactful for their career? And again, digging a little bit deeper into the art of reflective learning, journaling, and how can I teach the value of it to my coaches. Thanks so much for listening.